Good afternoon. Thank you for joining us for this short webinar on Clause 7, support of the management systems, ISO management systems. Without further ado, then we'll just jump into it, and I'll just give you a bit of background about CertiKit and a bit about myself, and then we'll dive into Clause 7. So, CertiKit. Leading creator compliance toolkits, provides ISO services based in Derbyshire. Been around since 2010. We've helped more than 4,000 businesses worldwide, although we're now sort of narrowing our looks as to who we're working with in the world to make sure we can fulfill service requirements. We specialise in ISO standards and data protection compliance management systems. And our mission is to make compliance easy for any organisation or business that wants to become compliant and conform to the requirements of ISO standards or information security standards. A bit about me. I'm Ted. I'm one of 2 compliance consultants that work for CertiKit. The voice that you heard just now is my colleague Jerry, and he's going to be riding shotgun and collating your questions, and he'll also be jumping in if he's got any pertinent information to share as we go through this webinar. I mainly deal with 9, 14, 45 and 22.301, looking after their toolkits and helping clients who have purchased those toolkits in implementing those. I'm also the technical author, so any toolkit requirements that need updating, I'll do that. I'm a certified 9, 14, 45, 27 and 22.301 lead auditor and have experience over 20 years working within management systems across lots of different industries. I'm also a certified integrated management lead auditor, implementer. So I can specialise, I have specialised in implementing 9, 14, 9, 14, 45 and 14 and 45. And for my sins, I'm a black belt Lean Six Sigma practitioner. That gives me another aspect of how to look at processes and procedures when working with clients. So what we're going to be covering today, we're going to look at the contents of Clause 7, which are resources, competence, awareness, communication, documented information, and we're going to break down all of those into their relevant requirements and how you can fulfill those. And then we'll finalise with a summary of what we've been talking about. So let's dive into this then. So Clause 7. This clause is written in within the ISO standards, written in the Annex L format, are fairly conformant across all of the ISO standards in this format, Annex SL format. And as we said before, these are the requirements. 7.1 of the clause is resources, 7.2 is competence, 7.3 awareness, 7.4 communications, and 7.5 documented information. So we'll break down each of those sub-clauses in a bit more detail now. So 7.1, this goes across all of the standards, as I said. There is a slight difference between the 9001 standard and the others, the 1445, 22.301, 27,000, etc. There is a slight difference, and we'll look at that in a minute. The standard deals with resources required for implementing and running the management system. It directs you, or the implementer, or the management team, to consider your current capabilities and restrictions of internal resources, such as the manpower, your experience, your equipment, and probably your budget is pretty important. And it also supports the operations of all processes within your organisation. So there are links, as we'll see later on in this webinar, how Clause 7 links to other parts of the management systems, and they're all important parts. So examples of resources, as I said, is financial, people, organisational knowledge, technology. 9001 delve a bit into the infrastructure, such as the facilities for what you're doing for your production or your service provision, your energy usage and your utilities, the environment for your organization's processes. So if you've got a workshop or you've got a factory, 9001 helps you to focus on the quality side of running your processes within that environment. The material needed for the provision of products and services. Services side, it's not just the material, so we're not just looking at like presentations, documentation, but also the material to go into your presentations, your research. You're gathering the information to what the client wants you to deliver. All of this is part of the resources that you need to think about. General information for the management system. Importantly, resources provided externally. And in 9001, when we do clause 8, which is the next one, I think we're doing that end of August. This is an important part. This is the only mandatory requirement for a procedure within 9001. It's externally provided resources and processes. And then finally, natural resources. So as I said, variations across. If you look at 9001, this is now split into a number of different areas. It generalizes the overall requirements of the resources. Then it goes into specifics for people. They're looking at the organization shall determine, provide those persons necessary for the effective implementation of its QMS and the operation and control of its processes. So this actually links closely with 7.2 and also 5.4 roles and responsibilities. So again, this is that linkage with other things. Next one is infrastructure. 9001 asks you to determine and provide and maintain an infrastructure necessary for the operations of your processes and to achieve conformity of products and services. And again, like these could include like the buildings, associated utilities, equipment, both hardware and software, transportation resources, logistics, maybe buses for staffing, information to clients, potential clients, to the community, to the staff, and any IT communication technology that's required for those processes and areas that will fit into your management system. Next one is the environment. It asks you to consider the environment for your operations of the processes, that you determine and provide and maintain the environment necessary for those operations and processes to achieve conformity. This could be a combination of human and physical factors, such as on the human side, non-discriminatory, a calm area to work in, non-confrontational, psychological, stress-free, burnout prevention, physical, temperature of the place they're working in. If you're in a humid climate, the humidity of the area that they're working in, have they got sufficient light? Have they got a sufficient natural light? If they're in a factory, is there sufficient airflow through that factory? 9001 asks you to think about determining these within that management system. Monitoring and measuring resources. This links with 9.1 of the standard. We'll ask you to monitor, analyze, and evaluate. You need to decide what equipment needs to be monitored, what areas need to be monitored, what processes need to be monitored, have things in place to do that, have checklists in place to make sure that equipment is properly validated and calibrated and is in date. Again, this reinforces what's in clause 9.1. And then finally, organization knowledge. This links closely with 7.3 awareness. The organization shall determine the knowledge necessary for the operation of its processes and to achieve conformity of products and services. The knowledge has to be maintained, so it has to be documented, and it has to be made available as and when necessary. New joiners would need to have an introduction to the QMS, to their part of their requirements within that QMS, if they're directly involved, or their department's requirements. This is part of that organizational knowledge that has to be addressed and shared. 7.2 competence. Again, this is the same across now all of the management systems. It requires you to determine the competence of the persons doing work under its control that affect the performance and effectiveness of, in this case, the quality management system, your information security management system, your environmental management system, whatever management system you're in. You have to determine the competencies of those individuals working under its control. So for information security, your CISO, your information security manager, your IT coordinator, your IT manager. Have you identified the competencies required for them within your management system? On the quality side, I'd be looking at quality manager, quality coordinator, maybe internal auditors, departmental managers. There is a requirement for them to have a part of their job is their understanding of their part within the quality management system. And the same with environmental health and safety. You need to ensure that these people are competent on the basis of appropriate education, training and experience. And these are documented within your job descriptions generally. So when you put an advert out for a new QMS, quality manager, you already have documented the relevant competencies. If it was a health and safety manager in the UK, maybe it has to have a NEBOSH qualification. If it's a ISO manager, an IS manager, InfoSec manager, maybe he has to have a CISO qualification. These are the competencies that you require. Now, you may determine that you're quite happy to bring somebody on to be trained up to that. However, you still got to identify the level they have to be trained up to. That would fall under your recruitment process, but you have to identify the competencies of each individual position and those competencies and requirements documented within the job description. When you're audited, and as an auditor, that's one of the trails I go down to. I'll ask for a job description for whoever, the QMS manager, the information security officer manager, whatever it is, and then look at their competencies. Then I'll ask the HR, where have you got these competencies from? Where are they mapped? Have they had any training for it? Where are the training records? Where are their assessments that they've been assessed against these? So all of this documentation is used as evidence to show that you're actually doing that and have fulfilled this requirement.
Can I leap in here as well?
Yeah, please do.
One thing to also bear in mind as well, and many companies get this wrong, is that when you're determining competence and you're defining the competence, and particularly as Ted said, when you want to feed that into your job role requirements and job descriptions, is also think very carefully about what are the essential skills that are required, which make it very easy then to match new candidates should a person leave the business, versus desirable things, to try and be very clear about essential job requirements, things that the job role or the job holder is expected to have to meet the defined level of competence, versus desirable skills, which are things that you can train and develop those skills upwards to meet the core essential requirements.
Yeah, exactly. That's what this bullet point is sort of saying. Where applicable, take actions to acquire the necessary competencies and evaluate the effectiveness of those actions against the level of competency. And of course, as with all management systems, retain appropriate documentation to show that you've done that. So you need to have evidence to say that we've assessed these people, we've looked at their training needs, we've got a training plan for them, they've gone on these training courses, they've got a certificate of attendance, or they've got their certification of competencies. All of that has to be documented information that an auditor can see that you are actually fulfilling the requirements of 7.2. Clause 7.3, again, pretty much the same across all the standards. This is where the organisation has to ensure that the persons working under the organisation's control are aware of the following. The relevant standards policy. 9001, you're looking at the quality policy, environmental policy. But when you come to InfoSec 27,000, it may not just be the overriding policy, but the other policies within that management system. For ordinary staff, it might be clear desk policy, clear screen policy, access policy. For IT, it might be other policies arranged around that, physical security. So it's not just about the standard policy, but other policies within the standard if required. The relevant standards objectives. If you were with us for the last webinar, we talked about clause 6, and in clause 6, this is where you decide, you plan and implement your objectives. It's pointless having your objectives when people don't know you've got objectives and they don't know they're part of that objective. Objectives could be departmental orientated, so a department may have an objective that fits within the management system. It might be company wide, it may be across departments, it doesn't matter, but people need to be aware that there are objectives within the business that are associated with your management system, what they are, what they're aiming for, who's responsible for them, and what they're hoping to achieve. They may be part of that journey, so they need to understand that. Their contribution to the effectiveness of the management system. This is something I think both myself and Jerry have seen when we've worked with companies that have implemented management systems. And when we've done auditing and you ask a member of staff, you're walking past, say, all right, can you tell me where your quality policy is? I haven't got a clue. Or I think it's on the wall in reception. It may be on the website. They need to understand across the board their effectiveness within the management system. So they need to know where the policy is and that. They need to understand why you have a management system. What's the benefits and what are they part of? And how it could affect them and how they could affect it. They must be made aware of this. And that's normally done through a series of awareness presentations when you start to implement your management system. And also any new joiners should go through that same awareness session as a new joiner, so they understand that there's a management system in place, where the where the policy is, what the policy states, why you've implemented it, what their part is in it, depending on which department it is, might have a greater part than a lesser part. By doing this, by including this, you get them part of the management system. And when you start implementing the management system, one of the biggest things we find is change management tends to throw up walls. But it throws up walls because people don't know why you're doing it. And this is where the awareness comes into it. By having a good awareness program in place, so people know that, oh, we've got a consultant coming around, never seen that guy before, what's he coming here and he's asking me questions on my process. If they're aware that you're doing a management system and that people are going to be walking around, sitting down and using their expertise and their knowledge to map their processes, they'll feel part of that process. They'll feel part of that implementation. You reduce the angst of change management, and that all comes down to having a good awareness program in place. Sorry to harp on about that, but it's something I see so many times, and it's something, if it's done right, means that the implementation goes a lot smoother. And then finally, implications of not conforming with the management system. The threats of non-conformities, the threats of failing certification or losing certification, which could lead to losing contracts. People need to be aware that one of the reasons you have a management system in place is that it does help you to win contracts. It might be a requirement that to get this contract, we have to have an environmental policy management system or environmental management system with an environmental policy and everything that goes with it. That's why we're doing it. And if you don't be part of that and you don't conform to the requirements, you don't fulfill your processes and procedures as we've written and documented them as with your knowledge and your expertise, we could lose that contract. So they need to understand the implications of not actually fulfilling their role within the management system. And not just their role, everybody's role within the management system. Slight variation, which is in 45,001, the Occupational Health and Safety Management System for 7.3. This is where we look at incidents and outcomes of investigations and the relevant things to them, the hazards, the risks, actions determined, and the relevance to them, and the ability to remove themselves from work. This is the common sense part of it. Like, you know, if you're working, if you've got a health and safety management system in place, there's a big push on having worker and staff inclusion within this. This is the common sense approach to this management system that says if you're in an area which you think is dangerous, you are all right to walk away. It's within the bounds of the management system requirements. Don't stay in a place that you could harm yourself or harm others. So these are the three requirement differences in 45,000, looking at incidents and their outcomes of the investigations into those incidents and anything relevant to them further down the line. Looking at hazards, risks and actions that are determined that are relevant to them and documenting those, putting those into a risk table. And the ability to remove yourself from work situations that is considered a present as an imminent serious danger to your life or health. Pretty common sense really for a health and safety management system. But those are the only variations on clause 7.3 across the other standards. 7.4 communications. Again, this is touched upon in clause 5, where senior management have to have a communication plan. In this case, they're looking for internal and external communications that are relevant to the management system. And they're looking at the following. They're looking at what communications are going to be needed, when to communicate that information, with whom you're going to communicate that information, how you're going to communicate, and then finally, who is doing the communicating within your establishment. So on what we'll be communicating is anything. It could be contracts, it could be recruitment, it could be social media, might be press releases, might be reports, might be internal audit reports. All of these are the types of communications that you have to think about, both internal and external. When you communicate, is this part of a process? You know, you start your process, then you've got to send that checklist off to somebody else. How are you going to send that checklist? Who's going to send it? What format is it going to be? It's part of this communication. Whom are you going to communicate with? Like I said, it's either internal, so it could be such as internal memos, reports, but external, it could be contracts, it could be changes to contracts, it might be a KYC if it's a financial type thing, could be regulatory bodies where you have to pass your information across, especially if it's a finance thing. So you've got your financial records that might need to be scrutinized, whatever it is. How you communicate, is it going to be a telephone call? Is it going to be an email? Is it going to be a fax? Is it original documents? Is it copied documents? All of these things are going to have to be thought about. And then who within the organization can actually send those communications? So like HR will only be able to send the job offers to potential new starters. CISOs and IT managers can only send data breach information to the ICO. the overseeing board in the UK. Internal auditors can send internal audit reports. So you have to identify who within your establishment, your organization, can send what type of information. It doesn't have to be hard to do this. A couple of simple matrices, and I've got an example here. So this is an example of an internal communication matrix. So we've got the information that's going to be sent, the sender, the format, when it's going to be sent, the frequency, and who's going to be receiving that information. So this is a nice short one. So quality policy, top management is the sender. It's going to go out in an email, goes out annually, and goes to all employees. Nice and easy one. Customer complaints. The sender is obviously the customer. It might be in an email, might be on a form on a website. It could be a telephone call. Frequency as received. Recipients are going to be the quality department, the support team, the relevant department to complain about, and maybe senior management. So that's an example of internal ones. External communication method, website. It's open to anybody who's got a computer. So you've got to think about that. So it's not just stuff that you're sending, it's stuff that you're showing out on your website information. So the purpose, provide information about products and services, responsibly marketing, and the frequency is outgoing. Social media, etc., press release, email campaigns, trade shows, regulatory bodies would go in there, potential clients for contracts and things like that. So having these two will make it a lot easier to identify what you're going to send, who you can send it to, how you're going to send it, when you're going to send it, and who's going to send it. These are the requirements of this part of the clause 7.4. The last one, and this is the biggest one of the clause, is documented information. And this is the same across all of the standards. Obviously, it's going to be relevant to the actual management system, but the requirements ask you to do exactly the same. It's split into a number of subdivisions, subclauses. So the first one is general, creating and updating, and document control. So general, it's really just a background to what the management system wants you to do, and it just says that you will maintain documented information as required to show you conform to the relevant requirements of this management standard and as evidence, etc. So it's just a background information. However, 7.5.2, creating and updating, although it's the same across all the standards, this now starts to go into your document life cycle. And this is what you need to do. You need to be able to document the life cycle. So when creating and updating document information, the organization should ensure means that you will ensure the appropriate identification and description of the document. So the standard is requiring you to have a reference for documents within your management system, a nomenclature for documents within your management system. It could be anything you want, so long as it is formatted and documented. All of those of you who have our toolkits, have seen our toolkits, our documents go in clause format. And if we think about clause, the QMS 9001, clause for the documents in there all start QMS-DOC for a document or QMS-form for a form, and then it's 04-1, 04-2, 04-3, all the way down, and then with a unique title for each document. But it could be anything you want, so long as it's document, so people can follow it when they produce documents in the future. What format you're going to do? Now, the new management systems allow you to have your document information in multiple formats, whether that's paper, electronic, Excel spreadsheet, PDF, a data file, whatever you want, so long as it's identified, it's part of your nomenclature for your management system, you can use it in whatever format. So remember, they've still got, whether it's a PDF or a JPEG, it would still have to have QMS dash doc form, whatever it is that JPEG is, and then 0428 JPEG of interested parties, whatever you want. You've also got to put in place how often you review the creation of the document as it goes through its creation, how often it gets reviewed, and the approval stage for that document. So this is the beginning of a document's life cycle, the creation and updating of the document. So you've got an idea what you want to create as a document. You've got the next number from your document register. That's going to be the number for the document and the title of the document. You then start creating it. It then goes off to review as you're creating it and gets amended, reviewed, etc., until you get to a point where it's ready to be published, and then it goes to approval to be published. That process has to be documented. 7.3 is looking at the controller documented information. Again, this is part of the life cycle. So it asks you to ensure that it's available and suitable for use when and where needed. So part of the life cycle, it's where you're going to store it. Is it going to be in a document management system like Confluence or ShareFile or something like that? Is it going to be a paper document? Is there going to be a repository in an office where all of these documents are kept? You have to let people know where it's going to be stored, how it's going to be stored. If it's on a computer system, is it in a file that's ready to be available? Is it a document that has restricted access to it? All of these things have to be considered. Is it adequately protected? So again, access control to documents. If they're electronically stored, do these documents have access control requirements? Are they paper documents? Do these documents need to be locked away? Are they sensitive information? PII information, job descriptions, personal bank accounts from the pay office and things like that. These documents need to be put away and locked away. So you need to think about, are they adequately protected? And then you also need to think about the distribution of the documents, like we just said, the access to the documents, retrieval of documents, and the use of those documents. All of these have to be carefully considered as part of the life cycle of this document. So your creation, your publication, how it's going to be used, how it's going to be stored, how it's going to be changed, because documents go through changes, especially if they're SOP, standard operating procedures. A process may change, so that document needs to be changed to fit with the new process. There has to be a change process within the life cycle of documents. So that has to be thought about. Storage and preservation, we just mentioned that as well. Where it's going to be stored. Where is it going to be stored when it becomes obsolete? How long are you going to store it for? How long are you going to keep dockets for? How long are you going to keep records for? I think financial records are about 5 years, something like that. Maybe processes you want to keep for 2 years. These have got to be documented, so those documents are kept, because as an auditor, I would ask for this section, say, show me your regulations on maintaining documented information. Oh, I see you keep records for financial records for 5 years. Okay, that's great. And you keep process minutes, meeting minutes for 2 years. Let's have a look at some of these process minutes. And I'll do there. I just say, you know, are these within the 2 years? You've got something that's 3 years old. Why is that still in there? You're not fulfilling your requirement. If it's there over 3 years, because it's 3 years out of date now, why hasn't that gone for destruction? So it's not a thing that you put down and then forget about. It's something you've got to maintain. And document control, if you've got a good document system or a good repository spreadsheet that you can keep those document information in, all of this should be documented in that. So you can just glance along and say, right, it's in for change now. He's doing the change. It's done review. This one's been published. It's now out there. The old one has been put into the archive on this date, and it goes moved to destruction on this date. So all on the register, so it's there and nice and easy to get to. So mentioning change control, this is paramount. Documents, as I said before, do change. Your policies will change over time. They're documented information. Your SOPs will change. Job descriptions change. Documented information. New lists might appear. They may change when something else is added to it. All has to go through a change process. So part of the life cycle of a document is that change process. And a bit like creating and updating, that change process has to go through a requirement for the change, the actual change, the review, amendment, approval, implement, review, sign off. You implement the document after it's gone through a change. You give it a period of time to settle in to make sure it's still fit for purpose, and then you get final sign off. So you have to have that in place as well. Retention disposition, as I said, documents moved from being published to obsolete or archived. How long are you going to keep those documented information for? Have it written down somewhere. Again, a simple matrix could be in there, could be at the end of the register. This document will be retained for 4 years and is expected to be destroyed, and have it in red and the next column, destruction date. So whoever's looking after that documented information can look down that register and say, oh, right, it's due for destruction this month. How are you going to destroy it? If it's paper, are you going to shred it, burn it? Or are you just going to throw it in the bin? It's 5 years old. Is it PII information? How are you going to destroy that? Because it's a bit more regulated. Is it electronic information? Are you going to delete the files? Are you then going to wipe that disk? Are you going to wash that disk to make sure that file can't be retrieved? All of these things have to be taken into consideration when you're looking at retention and disposition at the final part of the life cycle of a document and documented information.
Yeah, the other thing as well is with this whole process, if you do, I don't know how many are in the audience that are doing 27001, for example, but one additional requirement there is that part of your document control procedures is, you know, to have your data classification guidelines on, you know, the various sensitivity levels that you employ for your documents. And then obviously as part of your document control procedures is to also correctly apply those document classification guidelines onto the various policies, you know, the various ISMS documents and company-wide documents as you're processing them. So just another point to add on that for those that might be doing 27K.
Yeah, good point. Thanks, Jerry. Okay, so there's mandatory documents in all management system, ISO management systems. So we're going to look at the generic ones, but there are other specific ones within each management system. So the standard of your whatever chosen standard you're going to do, there will be requirements that state you shall retain as documented information or shall be documented. That means they have to be in place. They're mandatory. And an auditor, whether it's your own internal auditors, second party auditors, or your certification body auditors, will expect to be able to see those if requested to look at. So just a few generalized ones, generic ones. So scope of the management system, clause 4.3, that's mandatory across all of them. Management system policy, 5.2. Management system objectives, 6.2. Any mandatory document stated within your relevant management system. Also, any documented information that the organization deems as being necessary for the effectiveness of your management system can be added to this list. And if it is part of this list, an auditor will come in and audit those against your requirements within your documented information. So it's not just the management's requirements, management systems, but the business's requirements as well. Documented information is a big list, and this is just for 9001, and this goes on for another page. But this is the sort of thing that they're going to be looking for mandatory wise for 9001. So monitoring, measuring, equipment calibration, record of training skills, that's the same across all the standards. Evidence of communication across the same of all the standards. Document control across the same of all the standards. All the ones below that, clause A, are 9001 requirements that they have to have in place if they require them. And also continuing for 9001, we've got the rest of clause 8 in there. But when you come to clause 9, that's mandatory across all of the international standards. 9.2 standard across all of them, which is your internal audits, results for the internal audits, your audit reports is required, results of the management system, 9.3, and then finally the results of corrective actions and continuous improvement in clause 10. So again, generically, there are a lot of similar documented information that has to be retained and stored to show that you're actually doing what you're supposed to be doing for your management system. Quick look at how 7.7, clause 7, links with other areas of the standard. So clause 5, it links with the support of the implementation of the effective leadership practices by outlining the necessary support elements. And we'll see some of that in a minute. In clause 6, in planning, determines quality objectives, helps with that with the resourcing, looks at risks and opportunities. So it's looking at awareness and competencies here as well, as is leadership is looking for competencies of the roles and responsibilities. Clause 8 provides support necessary to the operational processes, includes adequate resources for infrastructure, competence, awareness of personnel involved in the operation, enables a smooth operation and facilitates the achievement of planned results within change management and within your processes. Clause 9, the organisation needs to monitor, measure, analyse and evaluate support processes. Documented information again, clause 7.5. And you're using that to determine the effectiveness or identify areas for improvement. This information then feeds into the performance evaluation that's described in clause 9. So again, documented information, clause 7.5 feeds into this. And then finally, clause 10 contributes to the improvement processes by ensuring that support elements are continuously reviewed, adjusted and optimized. So all of that information from clause 7.2, 7.1 resources, 7.2 competencies, 7.3 awareness, not just awareness within the company, but new joiners, and 7.5 documented information all contribute towards everything in your management system in some form or another. To summarize the roller coaster webinar, clause 7 supports the standard. They're interconnected with other clauses, as we've just seen. It provides the necessary support for an effective leadership, for planning, for operation, for performance evaluation, and for improvement. It has direct links with all of those areas of the standard. And by considering and integrating support requirements throughout the management system, your organization will be able to enhance the ability to meet not just the customers, but your own requirements, and to successfully achieve the management system objectives. So just before we finish, a little bit about what else we do. Obviously, we supply toolkits for 9, 14, 45, 27,000, 22301. We also do compliance toolkits for GDPR and other InfoSec requirements. And at the moment, as you see, we've got 15% off standard selected toolkits until August. For those that do purchase a toolkit, we do an LRS, a logo replacement service for under 50 quid. We can take all your documents and brand them with your logo and your name throughout. Think that some of our toolkits have over 190 documents in them, it saves you a lot of time putting your own branding and your own company name throughout your documentation. We provide ISO consultancy. We can do ad hoc consultancy, individual advisors for an hour here and there. We can do full project consultancy and work with you to implement your relevant management system within the company, and everything in between. We can be used to look at your documentation, to give advice about bits and pieces within what you're doing within your implementation. And then finally, we also provide an internal audits service for those that haven't got the resources to do internal audits themselves. We can come in and do your second party audits. We can help you build your audit schedule, how you're going to audit your management system over a 12-month period. And we can then come in and produce those internal audits with a full audit report. And some companies then have some of their staff sit beside us virtually to start picking up that, to start learning how to do internal audits themselves before going for internal auditing. Okay, Jerry, any questions in the chat box?
Okay, yeah, we've got a few questions coming through now.
Okay.
Right, one is, would you suggest structuring internal audits by sections and do each section once a year, or by your company processes? For example, I think the CertiKit templates and their example questions, would answering these template questions be sufficient?
Okay, there's two ways you can actually, well, there's a number of ways you can actually audit, do internal audits. One could be by doing departmental against the standard. Another one is you could audit the company against some of the requirements within the actual standard itself. So depending on which way you want to do it, you would then format your audit in that relevant way. What I tend to see is that all internal audits are sample audits. That means you can't be expected to audit every single thing within that scope of the internal audit, but you can select areas to look at to get the evidence to show that they're actually fulfilling those requirements. I've never done it personally, I've never done it departmental wise. I don't know about you, Jerry, have you?
I find it rarer. I think once, if for smaller companies, it might work, particularly if you can sort of, group the key processes that are happening in those business functions and do it by function. But often I think it's a lot easier to sort of structure it by areas of the standard, whatever. One approach I always recommend, again, I don't know whether we've got any 27k audience on the call, but if so, risk-based methods are probably quite appropriate. You can apply that to which processes in the organization present the most risk to you, and then you can audit those more frequently than less risky areas. But as long as over a certain defined time period, you can at least cover off, you know, most of the clauses, the standard over, say, a couple of year period or something like that. So I tend to come across more risk-based approaches. The other thing you can incorporate into risk approaches as well is the ability to highlight if any particular risks maybe have happened or occurred, then that could be your trigger as well to actually perform an audit on that particular process. So again, you're using your risk as your triggers to both audit frequency and for spot check or ad hoc audits.
Yeah, good point. I mean, the rule of thumb is that you would audit your critical areas more often than you would audit other areas. If you're newly certified, you should be aiming to sort of audit all areas within the 12 months. And then after you've gone through a couple of surveillance audits, or maybe after your second certification audit, you can then spread it out over a 2-year period or a 3-year period. So long as you audit all those areas within your certification period, you should be fine there. But the important thing is if you've identified critical areas, they would get audited a bit more often than other areas of the standard. I thank all of you for your attendance, your patience. I hope it's been useful, good information. We are doing some more, like I said, in the series. Every month we're doing a different clause. The next one is going to be clause 8. That's going to be probably a bit longer than this one because there's a lot of variation in that. And there's another one, I think early September, our boss is delivering one on internal audits. So keep an eye out on the audit on the CertiKit website or on LinkedIn with the CertiKit page to find out when they are. And look forward to seeing you at some of those in the future. Thanks, everybody.